as we go into the third Mishnah of the second chapter of Yevamot, we get a general rule, a general principle in the Mishnah. Klal amru bivama. Our general rule is stated about Yevamah. Kol shi asura isur erva. Anybody that's prohibited as a, I've translated here as a forbidden relationship, but erva is, it's more than a prohibited relation. It's a forbidden relationship. It's a forbidden relationship. Erva is it's a completely forbidden relationship. If the relationship is completely forbidden, so for example, the levirate marriage, the yibum, will result in someone marrying his, I don't know, mother and his well, the example we're going to come to is his mother-in-law. If it's completely forbidden, lo choletzet velo mitya bemet. The woman concerned doesn't have to do chalitza. She can't have yibum because essentially no yibum exists. So we said yesterday that yibum is, at least according to the fundamental of Torah law, is created at the instant that the instant of the death of a man who is childless and whose brother lives with him. And at that instant, as the childless man dies, a relationship is instantly created between his widow and his brother. But if there's a question of erava, if there's a question of forbidden relationship, this link between his widow and his brother is never created. So she never has to do chalitza nor have yibum. But the Mishnah goes on to say, isur mitzvah, if there's just a legal prohibition against the relationship, the isur kedusha, or some prohibition due to holiness, we'll find out what these are. Choletzet velo mitya bemet. She must perform chalitza. She doesn't have yibum. So in other words, somehow the relationship between the widow and the brother does exist, but we're not going to transgress a mitzvah, so we're going to ask her to do chalitza rather than yibum. And the Mishnah then, and we'll find out what these prohibitions of mitzvah and kedusha are. They're addressed in the next Mishnah. So we'll explore these. But before we explore them, the Mishnah is going to go on with a slightly puzzling example. Achota kashihi yevimta. If her sister is also her, well, the woman, the widow who's connected to her brother is also the Yevamah. If her sister is the Yevamah, but achotah here, her sister, we seem to be talking here about the sister of the one with the forbidden relationship. So if you like, we have two sisters. One has a forbidden relationship and the other has the possibility of yibum. If that's the case, or choletzet or mitya bemet, either she's got the choice. She can give chalitza, she can have yibum. She has a choice. And we need to understand what these two sisters are. And I've put a diagram on the source sheet just to show the position of two sisters married to two brothers. And in this diagram, and I'm going to carry on putting these diagrams on the source sheets. Gray denotes someone who has deceased, someone who's no longer there. And red denotes a yibum, which is impossible for reasons of forbidden relationships. So red is impossible, gray is deceased. And I'm picking up names, family relationships with which I hope you're familiar. So I won't need to explain that Leah and Rachel are sisters. And Leah has married Shimon and Rachel has married Levi. So in other words, Leah and Rachel have married Shimon and Levi. Two sisters, they've married two brothers. It's all possible. Unfortunately, Shimon and Levi pass away. So Leah and Rachel are now connected in terms of yibum, in terms of levirate marriage, to their brother Reuven. Reuven is still alive. But let's just stop and think for a minute. Reuven cannot possibly marry simultaneously two sisters. Or the halakha doesn't allow it when they're both alive. It actually does allow it when one is deceased. And how our father Jacob got away with it, we don't really understand. But for practical purposes, in Torah law, it's not permitted. So in this case, there is no yibum. There's no yibum at all. Reuven can't marry two sisters. We'll learn actually at the beginning of the next chapter whether chalitza is or not necessary in this case. But certainly no yibum is possible. Two sisters, two brothers. Now, let's just make this a little bit more complicated. Let's have one of the sisters forbidden to Reuven because of a forbidden relationship. Let's suppose that one of these sisters is actually Reuven's mother-in-law. So let me now show you or redraw the picture. Let's redraw the picture. And now we still have a red arrow denoting impossible yibum, but we have also a blue arrow denoting what is possible, what's permitted. And just as before, Leah and Rachel marry Shimon and Levi. But Leah has a daughter called Dinah, and Dinah has married Reuven. So Reuven is married to Leah's daughter. Leah is his brother's wife, is also his mother-in-law. His brother's wife is his mother-in-law in this situation. Now, Shimon and Levi pass away. Reuven cannot marry Leah. She's his mother-in-law. So there is no yibum relationship at all between Reuven and Leah. And that means that the relationship with Rachel now does exist. Because he's forbidden to marry Leah, he can marry Rachel. And so the Mishnah says Rachel can have either chalitza or yibum. Out of these two sisters, she's the only one who might be permitted to Reuven. Therefore, there is a relationship with yibum, and she can either have chalitza. Well, let's go back to check the Mishnah. She can achotak sheyivimta, her sister. That's the sister of the forbidden, the sister of the forbidden relationship. Yevimta, who is possibly subject to yibum, or choletzet, or mitya bemet, either she has chalitza or she has yibum. That is the decoding of the end of Mishnah 3 in the second chapter. Let's press on a little bit. Let's remember that Mishnah 3 also mentioned Isur mitzvah and Isur kedusha, prohibition due to a commandment or prohibition due to holiness. And let's just try to explore what these are in the fourth Mishnah. So the fourth Mishnah says, Isur mitzvah. What's that? Arayot midivrei sofrim. Now I'm following the Kaufman manuscript here. The printed text actually says, I think, shiniot. I think the printed text says shiniot midivrei sofrim. Arayot midivrei sofrim are incest forbidden by the scribes. Shiniot midivrei sofrim are secondary degrees of incest. Either way, in order to understand it, let's look at a baraita, a Tannaitic source, a source from the time of the Mishnah in the Talmud in Yevamot. And the Talmud asks, Tanu Rabbanan, our teachers taught, Mahem Shiniot, what are these secondary relationships? And then the Talmud brings out a whole bunch of relationships which are not mentioned by the Torah, and yet which are forbidden. And when we read through this, we'll see they're sort of obvious. We're surprised they're not mentioned by the Torah, but the rabbis are good at picking through the Torah and just filling in the cracks. And this is what they've done here. Aim Imor, his mother's mother, Ve'aim Aviv, his father's mother, those are his two grandmothers, ve'eshet avi aviv, and his father's eshet avi aviv, his grandfather's wife, ve'eshet avi imo, his other grandfather's wife, ve'eshet achia av mina em, and the wife of his father's half brother, and the wife of his mother's half brother, and his son's daughter-in-law and his daughter's daughter-in-law. So all of these are very close to the relationships which are forbidden by the Torah, but they're not mentioned in the Torah. And so the rabbis call them sheniot. They call them secondaries. And there are, as we said, there's some printed texts of our Mishnah read Isur mitzvah sheniot midivrei sofrim. A prohibition due to a commandment, due to a commandment. These are the secondaries from the words of the scribes. So these are, because these prohibitions don't exist in Torah, there is a relationship of Yibum. But because there's an Isur, we ask that the woman performs Chalitza and does not perform Yibum. And the same if there's an Isur Kedusha. What is an Isur Kedusha? Well, the Mishnah goes on. A prohibition due to holiness. Well, there's another list. Almana Kohen Gadol. A divorced woman, a widow marrying a high priest. So in the Parsha of Emor, we learn that a high priest can't marry a widow. Gerusha v'chalutza Kohen Hedyot. What about someone who's divorced or someone who's had who's performed chalitza to an ordinary kohen? Now, a kohen is not allowed to marry a divorced woman, and indeed, someone who's performed chalitza has the same status as a divorced woman. So a kohen can't marry those. Mamzeret nutina Yisrael, a mamzeret or a netina to an ordinary Yisrael. And a mamzer is the product of a forbidden union, and they can't marry a Yisrael, so they can't have Yibum. And netina. Now, a natin is a Gibeonite. So a netina is a female Gibeonite. These are mentioned in the book of Judges. They tried to convert to Judaism. They were considered not to be faithful converts, and they sort of live among the people of Israel, but the judges made a ruling that they couldn't intermarry with the people of Israel. And then in the other gender direction as well, Uvat Yisrael mamzer ve'la natin. Add an Israelite woman to a natin or a mamzer. And in all of these cases, the relationship of Yibum exists, but because it's prohibited, we ask that the woman performs chalitza rather than accepting Yibum.